Hello and welcome to the Violence Against Women Act, also known as VAWA, Request for Proposal Grant Writing Workshop. I'm Kristen Wood-Hegner, the VAWA Grants Administrator at the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission, also known as CVRC. The CVRC Grants Department also includes Bureau Chief Donna Richmond, VOCA Grants Administrator Lourdes McKenna, State Grants Administrator Maribel Baca, and Grant Program Specialists Nathan Furr, Jackie Mascarenas, and Sadie Sires. Today is January 22nd, 2024, and we're going to talk about the State Fiscal Year 2025 Request for Proposal for New Mexico's Stop Violence Against Women Act funding opportunity, which CVRC issued today. You can download this PowerPoint using the link in the description below. This webinar is intended to assist continuation programs and competitive programs in the grant writing process. This project is supported by the federal grant number 15J OVW 23GG00591 of the Stop Violence Against Women program. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this video are those of the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Department of Justice or the Office on Violence Against Women. The mission of the Stop Violence Against Women program is to encourage states to develop and strengthen the criminal justice system's response to violence against women and to support and enhance services for survivors of these crimes. Despite its title, the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, focuses on services for adult victims of all genders and gender identities who have experienced domestic or dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. An adult victim of any of these crimes cannot be denied services on the basis of gender or gender identity under VAWA. VAWA also covers services for children, but only as secondary victims or witnesses to intimate partner violence. Children or secondary victims may not be the primary focus of a funded project. The Stop Violence Against Women program and CVRC adhere to a strategic implementation plan for the state and federal funds administered by our office, which includes the STOP funding we're talking about today. The plan sets priorities and builds on each subsequent year of funding. The proposals for these funds, like what you'll be submitting for Stop VAWA, are based upon this plan and the priorities. The latest implementation plan was adopted on June 16, 2022, and you can download that from our online grants management system called Web Grants. If you're not familiar with Web Grants, don't worry, we'll discuss that in more detail later in the webinar. The implementation plan may also be downloaded from our website at cvrc.state.nm.us. Pay close attention to the goals and objectives on pages 30 to 40 of the implementation plan. As you write your proposal, show how your plan aligns with these goals and objectives. If you're applying for competitive funding, opposed to continuation funds, you'll especially want to look at the concise goals and objectives on pages 30 to 32, and the description of how STOP funding is used to meet the goals and objectives within the specific discipline you're applying under: victim services, law enforcement, prosecution, or court. Turn to pages 38 and 39 to find how the funding is used for underserved communities and cross-cutting efforts, which are multidisciplinary efforts and systems levels improvements like co-located services or cross-system data collection. The next section covers the mandatory Stop VAWA allocations. Federal guidelines dictate that at least 25% of these funds be awarded for prosecution purposes, at least 25% for law enforcement purposes, at least 30% for victim service purposes, and at least 5% to the courts. The victim services and court allocations are already met for this award by the continuation commitments, but victim services and court projects are still eligible to apply for discretionary funds. Remember, victim services must be for the VAWA-eligible crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. These services can include hotlines, legal advocacy, shelters, crisis intervention, and others. So if you're applying for funding of victim services, make sure to read the section on page 40 for more information on which services are eligible. There's also a sexual assault set-aside where at least 20% of the Stop VAWA funds will continue to be allocated towards sexual violence across at least two categories. Projects counted toward this set-aside must meet the standards established by the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs. Historically, CVRC has also worked toward equitable distribution of Stop VAWA funds between domestic violence and sexual violence service providers. Previously, Stop VAWA funds were used to establish the New Mexico Intimate Partner Death Review Team, which is a multidisciplinary group of professionals who meet regularly to review cases involving deaths related to intimate partner violence and sexual assault, and produce an annual report with recommendations. The current implementation plan addresses all the recommendations from the 2021 report, and the relevant VAWA-eligible recommendations have been incorporated directly into the goals and objectives discussed earlier. You can read the full list of recommendations in Appendix D. Pages 45 through 48 discuss addressing the needs of underserved victims. Of the 30% of funds allocated for victim services, 10% of that is allocated for culturally specific community-based organizations. Also, priority consideration is given to proposals that specifically improve services for populations with access barriers due to race, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, age, or geography. Congress mandates that applicants coordinate with community partners while developing a proposal. Proposals must list meetings with a minimum of 2 collaborative partners, such as nonprofit victim service providers and governmental entities providing victim services, that took place between the release date of this RFP and the date of submission. Meetings outside this time frame will not qualify. The meetings must discuss the proposal development, so ongoing community coordinated response and multidisciplinary team meetings do not meet the criteria. Agencies are required to work together. Proposals without sufficient collaboration are deemed ineligible, and proposals are commonly disqualified for a lack of collaboration. Now let's go over the Request for Proposal, or RFP, and how to submit a proposal. The RFP can be downloaded from WebGrants at nmcvrcgrants.com, and it's attached to the solicitation announcement that's being distributed statewide. While working on your proposal, have the implementation plan and RFP handy for easy reference, because your proposal should support the implementation plan priorities, the VAWA core priority services, and the RFP proposal requirements, process, and timeline. Familiarize yourself with these documents and make note of important information and deadlines, especially the time that items are due. If items are submitted after the designated time, they will not be accepted. Here are some important dates for you to add to your calendars now. Your proposal is due at 4:00 p.m. Mountain Time on March 1st, and the last date to ask a question about the proposal process is a few days earlier on February 27th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Preliminary award notifications will go out on April 25th, and this is the start of the protest period if you disagree with a decision. You'll have until 10:00 a.m. on May 6th to protest, and there's a process to do that we'll cover later in this webinar. The final award notifications will be released on May 23rd. Your nearest upcoming deadline is registering in WebGrants by February 27th, so let's learn how to do that now. Before you register, we recommend watching the 1-minute step-by-step guide, WebGrants Getting Started, on the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission YouTube channel. You can find our channel by clicking on the green N icon beneath this video. While you're there, hit subscribe and check out our WebGrants instructional playlist with a series of short how-to videos to help you navigate the site. You can visit WebGrants by going to nmcvrcgrants.com and start the registration process by clicking the yellow button that says "Click here to register." Complete the form and click the green Save Registration Information button to submit your registration request. The information is then sent to CVRC for approval, and requests are reviewed Monday through Friday and may take up to 1 day to process. After CVRC approves your registration, you'll receive an email with your username and password. Please keep your login information safe and don't share accounts. If other staff in your agency also need WebGrants access, they should register individually before the deadline and use their own user ID. If you already have an account in WebGrants, you won't need to register again. For assistance accessing your account, please contact the CVRC Grants Department. Once you're set up in WebGrants, you may have questions about the RFP and your proposal. For the integrity of the process, these questions must be submitted in web grants. All applicants can view the submitted questions and CVRC's responses, so everyone has equitable access to the same information. Please do not reach out directly to CVRC staff for help with a proposal, as we are not able to respond. To ask a question in web grants, log in, click Funding Opportunities and the VAWA 2025 solicitation, then click Ask a Question. Once you post your question, it'll become visible to all users, and CVRC will provide a response within 3 days. All questions must be submitted before 10 a.m. Mountain Time on February 27th. So we highly encourage you to get started on your proposal and ask questions early to ensure you have time to get the answers you need. Web grants will not accept a late question even 1 minute after the deadline. The same is true for submitting your proposal. The submission deadline is 4:00 p.m. Mountain Time on March 1st, and web grants will block attempts to edit or submit proposals starting at 4:01. Late applications cannot be accepted, including continuation applications, so please submit on time. That deadline is non-negotiable, and you will not be able to protest a late submission. The amount of available Stop VAWA funding can be found in the RFP. This amount available for competitive funding is dependent upon the amount committed to continuation funding. All funded programs in good programmatic and financial standing that also apply for continuation funds each year will receive funding for 4 years, unless it's a non-recurring project like a conference. Continuing agencies receive the original award amount for the first 2 years, then 90% of that amount in year 3, and 80% of that original amount in year 4. In the 5th year, the agency is considered a new applicant again and must apply in the competitive process. The Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2022 outlines 24 federal purpose areas, and proposals must support at least one federal purpose area and the state implementation plan goals and objectives. The review committee takes into account how an applicant has incorporated the purpose areas and priorities, and these can be an important factor in determining if a proposal is denied, partially funded, or fully funded. The state implementation plan and federal purpose areas can be downloaded in web grants and at cvrc.state.nm.us. Proposals will only be accepted if they are on time, complete, and meet all the mandatory elements in the RFP. The preliminary award notifications will go out on April 25th, and you may choose to protest that decision if your proposal was denied funding or you did not receive the funding that you had requested. To protest, you must email a letter to the CVRC Director and VAWA Grant Administrator by 10:00 a.m. Mountain Time on May 6th. Again, the letter must be emailed. Letters received by other means such as fax, FedEx, postal mail, or hand-delivered will not be accepted. The letter must include the grounds for protest, supporting exhibits, and what you hope the ruling would be. To begin your applications, navigate to web grants and view the funding opportunity. If you're a continuing agency, you can copy a previous application to update here. For new competitive applications, you can start a fresh application here. In the application sections, please remember that the project summary, the primary project components, the narrative, and the budget all need to support each other and be aligned. If you have a project summary that says you want to support a prosecutor, but your narrative talks about the need for additional victim advocates, and your budget has an investigator, the proposal review committee will see that inconsistency. It's really important that you ensure that this 750-character summary aligns with the budget, the goals and objectives, and the narrative. In the narrative section, all questions 1 through 7 are mandatory for all competitive proposals. The only question required for continuation projects is number 7, and 1 through 6 are optional. If you're submitting a proposal for continuation funding, there's no need for you to enter any information in 1 through 6. In Narrative 1, provide a comprehensive description of your agency's work with survivors. Please describe who your organization is and know that the Proposal Review Committee is comprised of people from around the state who understand survivor services, both governmental and non-governmental. This is an opportunity to be candid about the services that your agency is and is not providing. You can say if this funding is needed to support sustainability to continue doing the great work you're doing, or if it is intended to address something that you've seen as well. For narrative 2, make sure that as you're identifying the target population, that this aligns with the goals and objectives and that it's clear through the budget which positions are going to support that. Narrative 3 is the backbone of the proposal, where you will describe why the agency needs this funding. What is the purpose of this funding? What is the presentation of the problem? Everything, your summary, your budget, and your goals and objectives should align with narrative number 3. Here are some questions to think about as you develop this problem statement. How many people will be affected? Can you prove it? Is it anecdotal? Are there statistics? If not, why aren't there statistics? What's happening in your community, your agency, or the state that you need to address? What's the impact going to be on the criminal justice system and the targeted region that you're addressing? Use accurate, quantitative surveys, focus groups, intimate partner death review team information, the sexual violence and domestic violence repository data. There's a lot of research in the state. You can go to all 3 coalitions, the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence, New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, and the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, to gather information to demonstrate that you understand the needs of your program and agency and why you're applying for these funds. It should be clear and concise. Weak problem statements indicate to the Proposal Review Committee that you're not prepared as an organization to address the issue. Narrative 4 is identifying underserved populations. How will they be affected? How will you provide linguistically and culturally accessible services? Narrative 5 is about your proposal's alignment with the implementation plan and federal purpose areas. How do you address the implementation plan and the federal purpose areas? You can view the federal purpose areas, which include 4 new ones added by the 2022 VAWA reauthorization, by downloading the document in the Funding Opportunity and Web Grants or from cvrc.state.nm.us. It's very important to talk about how this proposal is meeting the needs that we have identified as goals for our state and how it meets the purpose areas outlined by the federal government. In Narrative 6, identify your project partners candidly and honestly. We've had proposals that identify organizational partners that the review committee knows don't collaborate with each other. Demonstrate how you have meaningful collaboration, and your response can also identify how you'll be addressing siloing and lack of collaboration. Number 7 is the question that is mandatory for everyone, both competitive and continuation proposals. You must describe your limited English proficiency and accessibility plans and how your agency supports those costs, including transportation barriers and accommodations for individuals with limited English proficiency or those who are deaf and hard of hearing. Again, meaningful collaboration is mandatory. The mission of the STOP grant is to develop partnerships to decrease the incidence of violence against women, so applicants should not be working in silos. Your organizations must demonstrate collaborative partnerships and resource sharing for mutual gain. Collaborative agencies should benefit by grant funding in some way, such as training or assistance. If they are making a commitment to you, you should be making a commitment to them. Collaborative agencies should be part of the planning process. This is a very important part of the proposal, and qualifying collaborative meetings must have taken place during the RFP period. Evidence of strong collaboration must be included in the proposal. The next part of the application is checking the appropriate federal purpose areas. Aligning with at least one of the 24 federal purpose areas is mandatory. Select yes for each area that applies to your proposal. Next are the primary project components, PPCs. The PPCs are your roadmap and game plan, so these goals need to be measurable with supporting activities on a timeline with an evaluation process. The first step of writing your PPCs is establishing a realistic and reasonable goal that relates to the problem in your Narrative 3 response. This goal statement must flow logically from that problem statement, and you'll describe how this project is going to identify and address the problem you've already discussed in the application. This should not be a large-scale societal goal like ending gender-based violence or achieving world peace, and you should focus on something that's measurable, that's within your agency's control. For example, increase the number of domestic violence victims who receive legal assistance then obtain restraining orders is a better goal than reduce the incidence of domestic violence in the county, because it is focused on what your agency can realistically achieve and measure with this funding. As you develop your goals and objectives, remember that they must be measurable. You can use words like maintain, increase, decrease, or enhance, and be specific. For example, if you want to improve prosecution rates by 20%, include what the starting base is and what that improvement will look like. If prosecution is at a 7% conviction rate now, and you want to improve that to 20%, then the review committee needs to know what that change is going to look like, how you're going to implement it, what the objective is, and that you understand the goal. Objectives should be SMART, specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound. Again, if you're using percentages such as increase or decrease, make sure that you have a baseline of implementing activities, or those activities that you must do to carry out the objectives. They should be listed within the timeline. The impact shows how you can prove that you did the activities and how you're going to measure that. An example PPC is providing training to law enforcement in San Juan County by conducting one training per quarter. That's measurable and on a timeline. At this point, you've written your narrative where you've talked about the problem, and it ties into the summary. You've aligned these with your goals and objectives and know how you're going to measure them. So now it's time to work on the budget. If different people are working on different sections of your application, for example, your CFO may be doing the budget, it's important to work together to ensure all these items support one another. For example, if you asked for a prosecutor in your narratives and PPCs, but the CFO creates a budget with an advocate, that's a problem. Work together as a team to make sure that the budget reflects the activities in the primary project components and addresses the problem statement identified in the narrative. Before submitting a budget, please check that it is realistic and aligned with the problem statement and the activities. Also check that the budget is rounded to the nearest dollar, such as $25,000, not $25,000.42. You can have a specific dollar amount, like $24,742, which shows that you've really thought about the cost, but please don't ask for 42 cents. The Proposal Review Committee wants to see that the proposed expenditures are supported in the primary project components and narrative. Ensure that there is not a disconnect in the application with a funding request that is unrealistic, too low, or too high. For example, if an agency asks for the entirety of the available funding, they must show that they can realistically support that. Follow the instructions to submit your proposed budget through the Web Grants application and check that it follows the grant guidelines. Your budget is rounded off to the nearest dollar, the match is correct if applicable, and your budget aligns with the narratives and PPCs. Some agencies must provide matching funds for 25% of a project, and this needs to be included in their proposal budget. All governmental agencies like prosecution, law enforcement, and the courts must provide match and cannot apply for a match waiver. Tribal and nonprofit, non-governmental agencies using the requested funds to provide direct services do not have to provide match. Nonprofit agencies using the funds for other purposes may apply for a match waiver. To calculate the required match amount, let's use an example of a $10,000 award. Multiply $10,000 by 0.25, 25%, then divide by 0.75, 75%, which gives you the required match amount of about $3,333. An easier way to find this amount is to divide your award by 3. 10,000 divided by 3 is also $3,333. If a tribal or nonprofit non-governmental service provider would like to use STOP funding for a project outside of direct service activities, they can complete the match waiver request form. Again, governmental organizations are not eligible to apply for a match waiver. Matching requirements can be met with cash or in-kind matches, like volunteer time, interns, or donations of expendable equipment or office supplies. You cannot use other federal funding sources as match. All applicants must certify that they have meaningfully collaborated with non-governmental victim service providers on the development of the proposal. Proposals must have meetings with a minimum of 2 collaborative partners and list the dates and contents of the meeting on the certification of consultation form. This form should be signed by an authorized individual of the agency. Again, qualifying meetings must take place between the date this RFP was issued and when the proposal is submitted. Ongoing meetings like CCRs and MDTs are important, but not eligible for the certification. VAWA requires that these meetings must discuss the development of the proposal. Meaningful collaboration can look like resource sharing, service coordination, and other mutually beneficial commitments. Additional documentation is also required to be uploaded and attached to your proposal. All applicants need to sign and submit federal certification forms and a disclosure of lobbying form, also known as SF-LLL, which can be downloaded from the Web Grants application at nmcvrcgrants.com or the CVRC website at cvrc.state.nm.us. For funded positions and positions used as match, agencies need to attach job descriptions and resumes if the position is already filled. Completed contracts or drafts of the contracts for consultants on the grant are also required. Every agency should also submit its most recent audit, even if CVRC already has it on file, your current operational budget, and a VAWA staff spreadsheet of all funded and matched staff, with a breakdown of the funding sources for their total salaries. Nonprofit agencies should submit proof of their 501c3 status, articles of incorporation, and a current list of board members with their contact information, occupations, and the start and end dates of their terms. Applicants must submit the plan for meaningful access for persons with limited English proficiency, LEP, including deaf and hard of hearing individuals. This is the plan that's discussed in Narrative 7, and reasonable costs associated with providing access should be in the agency budget. You may include accessibility costs related to the proposed project in the project budget as well. The plan should include the organization's process for identifying LEP persons who need language assistance, the percentage of LEP persons in your service area, the frequency LEP persons come into contact with your program, your resources for LEP persons, how staff are trained to serve LEP persons, your LEP policy development, and how you provide information about your services to LEP persons. You can visit lep.gov to learn more about the federally required elements of the Limited English Proficiency Plan. While developing your proposal, ensure that it will meet all the RFP requirements and align your priorities, narratives, PPCs, and budget with your problem statement. Again, if your problem statement is talking about prosecution, then the rest of your application should be tied to that. So your PPCs may include increasing prosecution rates in your communities, and your project budget may include a prosecutor rather than an advocate. The amount requested should reflect the project budget and consider the amount of available funding in this RFP. All applicants must have meaningfully consulted with non-governmental victim service organizations in the development of the proposal. Continuation projects won't need to resubmit all of these elements, but will have to respond to Narrative 7 with the LEP information, attach the other required documents, and update the project budget, which should correspond with the funding associated with the project's year in the grant cycle, and incorporate reductions for years 3 and 4. To help with proofreading and saving your progress, it's recommended to write your proposal responses in a Word document first. Then carefully copy and paste each section into WebGrants to submit before the deadline of March 1st at 4 o'clock. Now let's walk through the submission process. Visit nmcvrcgrants.com and log in with the credentials you received after registering. Click Funding Opportunities, then select the current solicitation, Stop Violence Against Women Grant VAWA Solicitation Fiscal Year 2025. Select the application you'd like to copy, then click Copy Application. Click into General Information, then Edit Form. You can add multiple people in your organization here to access, view, and edit the application. Update your primary contact and project title, then hit Save. WebGrants takes us back to application details. Now click into Stop VAWA Application, then Edit Form. Indicate if you're a continuation or competitive project, then answer which communities the project targets and if this application is for the purposes of prosecution, law enforcement, victim services, courts, or other. Enter your SAM.gov registry and the brief description of the project. Complete the information for the finance officer and indicate if they are the authorized individual. If you click No, more questions appear. Enter information for the person responsible for civil rights and hit Save. The system won't let you save if the required sections are incomplete, and a red asterisk will show you what needs to be added. If you go back to the application forms, you'll see the sections are not marked as complete. Now select the federal purpose areas, edit form, select the appropriate federal purpose area or areas, click Save, select VAWA narrative, edit form, then copy and paste your responses into the narrative boxes and mark as complete. You can see the VAWA narrative now has a green check mark next to it. Click into Primary Project Components. Click a row to edit an existing item or click the green button Add Row to add a new item. You'll enter your goal, measurable objective, implementing activity, who will perform it, and which quarters it will be performed in, and the impact evaluation activity, then click Save Row. Click Next to go to the budget. This works the same way, where you can click an existing line item to change it, or you can add row to add a new line item. For personnel, you'll add the staff person's name if known, their position, their annual salary, and their hourly rate. For federal hours, that's how many hours you'll charge to the grant per week, and match hours is how many of their hours you will use as match each week. Then federal months is how many months will be attributed to the grant, and match months is how many months you'll be using their salary as a match. Federal amount is the total amount you're asking for that person's salary, and the match amount is the total amount you'll use for match. Now let's look at the match waiver. Click Edit Form. If you're a tribal or nonprofit victim service organization who would like to use this funding for purposes other than victim services, for example, let's say you wanted to do training for law enforcement, you could say yes and then complete this information to request a match waiver. Once you've completed it, you'll click Save Form. Next is the certification of consultation. Add the information about your minimum of 2 agencies that you have met with collaboratively, and those meetings must have taken place between the issue of the RFP and your proposal submission for the certification of consultation. Right, who you met with, which agency it was, the date it occurred, and what specifically you discussed in relation to the proposal developments. And then you'll click Save Row. Last is additional documentation required. If you copied an old application, you may have to delete some of the existing documents by clicking the red Delete button, and that will free up a line item for you to be able to upload a new document. You select File, and then you'll write a description, and then you'll click Save File. And you'll do that for each of these documents. If you don't select the file, you'll get an alert, and it won't allow you to proceed, and it won't allow you to mark it as complete. Once all of the sections and application details have a green check mark indicating that they're complete, you'll be able to submit your application. To ask questions, click the blue Ask Question button in the right corner, and then click Save. To view questions and responses, go back to the funding opportunity and scroll to the bottom. You'll be able to see everyone's questions, the dates they were asked, and CVRC's responses. Just above questions, you'll see the website links and attachments. Here's the link to download the documents that we discussed from the CVRC website. You can also find links to the YouTube channel and the Web Grants playlist, and we'll add a link to this video as well. You'll be able to find the PowerPoint soon under the attachments, as well as the lobbying activities form, the federal certification and assurances forms, and the VAWA 2022 federal purpose areas. This is also where you can download the RFP document. To start a new application, click here and complete each section as we did with the copied application. Remember to save frequently. If you've applied before, you can click Copy Existing Application. If you need technical assistance, please contact me, Kristen Wood-Hegner, the VAWA Grant Administrator, at kristen.wood-hegner@cvrc.nm.gov or 505-709-0485. If you have an urgent need and I'm not available, you may also contact Bureau Chief Donna Richmond at donna.richmond@cvrc.nm.gov or 505-795-4486. If you have any questions about the RFP or your proposal, please use the questions function in Web Grants. Thank you for attending the Fiscal Year 2025 Stop VAWA Grant Writing Workshop, and thank you for all you do for victims across our state. Good luck to all the applicants, and we look forward to reading about the great work you're planning for the coming fiscal year.